The Great Indian Political Weekly.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Great Indian Political Weekly, a conversation around various aspects and issues on the Indian political, social and cultural landscape. I am Sandeep Balakrishna.
I am Arjun Bharadwaj.
I am Hari Ravikumar.
So the topic for this week's episode is injecting the far left ideology into Sanskrit studies. You might be wondering at what this title means. So to give a brief backgrounder, the recently concluded 17th World Sanskrit Conference in Vancouver, Canada between 9th and 13th of July 2018 revealed some very interesting developments. The conference was hosted by the Department of Asian Studies at the University of British Columbia and convened under the auspices of the International Association of Sanskrit Studies, or IASS. The convener of the conference was Mr. Adhish Sataye, Associate Professor of Sanskrit Literature at the University of Columbia, who has written works like Crossing the Lines of Caste, Vishwamitra and the Construction of Brahmin Power in Hindu Mythology. This Sanskrit conference was witness to about 500 paper presentations in all and attended by over 2,000 students, scholars and academics drawn from various parts of the world. As part of this conference, a public forum titled Caste and Gender in Sanskrit Studies on 10th July 2018 featuring Professor Mandakranta Bose, Dr. Ananya Vajpayee and Kaushal Pawar eventually became the subject of a raging controversy. With me on this podcast is Mr. Arjun Bharadwaj. Arjun, the question is to you. As someone who has presented a paper in the aforementioned Sanskrit conference, please share exactly what transpired in this public forum titled Caste and Gender in Sanskrit Studies.
Thanks, Sandeep. Before we go into this particular forum, which was held on the second day of the conference, let me start about the very inaugural session of the conference. What would you expect in a World Sanskrit Conference that happens once in 3 years, an international Sanskrit conference? You would expect
they would have started with a Vedic mantra, right?
Well, that is what even I thought. All of us in the audience thought that the Sanskrit conference would start with Vedic chanting, the first peak in Sanskrit literature, the first documentation, the oldest documentation in the world that we have gotten today, the Rig Veda. So we thought a Sanskrit conference, the world's oldest language, would start with invoking one of the deities, the blessings of one of the deities as mentioned in the Rig Veda. So we thought it would start with one of the Vedic hymns. If not,
could be like Sahana Bhavatu or
possibly.
Or was it like did they start with a Saraswati Vandanam?
Well, that was the other option. They could have sung a song on Saraswati.
Yeah, it could be at
Saraswati
or whatever it is.
Or on Shiva or on Ganesha. They are the deities in one sense or the other. They are embodiments of knowledge in the Indian tradition. But then they started with an invocatory dance on Buddha and the Manipadma. Well, we have nothing against Buddha in Sanatana Dharma. He is very much an integral part of Sanatana Dharma.
Buddha actually says that, what I am saying is nothing new from what Vedanta, the rishis of Vedanta have said.
Right. So, I didn't see anything out of place there. Buddha is okay. We have respected him in the Sanskrit tradition, in the Indian intellectual tradition as well. But then I started putting two and two together once I started attending few of the paper presentations.
Okay.
Many of the paper presentations has had topics such as, or topics or themes and content such as, was man dominating in the Panchatantra? Were women denigrated to subsidiary jobs such as childbirth and child rearing?
Okay, childbirth is a job. Okay,
it's a job which is a subsidiary job as well.
Okay.
So this is what I got to know there.
Okay.
So I went to learn things and I learned things.
Yeah, it's good learning actually.
And I also heard talks by one of the senior professors who discussed how in the Uttara Ramacharitam there was co-education, and which the co-education which was previously not there, and Bhavabhuti, who's the author of Uttara Ramacharitam,
Okay.
was apparently ahead of his times,
Okay.
and he had started and advocated co-education as in men and women studying together in a
Right.
Gurukula,
Right.
suggesting that previous to Bhavabhuti's times this did not exist.
So
Okay.
what is for me to understand, what is the period of Bhavabhuti roughly?
Bhavabhuti's period is certainly after the period of Kalidasa, that is after the 5th and 6th century.
So then how does it explain people like Gargi and Maitreyi, who are Rishikas, who are seers of Vedic mantras, they didn't have education at that time?
Well, such doubts came to my mind as well, but let me give a few more examples.
Okay.
There were also paper presentations where discussions such as, was Shakuntala more progressive as a lady than Satyavati, or Satyavati was more progressive? Such kind of things were discussed based on the Indian classical literature, the Sanskrit classical literature. I had really expected, me especially being from a literary background, from trying to understand Indian aesthetics, I'd expected an aesthetic analysis of the Indian Kavya literature, but all the kind of analysis that was present in different sessions were coming from a certain perspective, from a certain viewpoint. Roughly put,
I would like to interject here. Sorry
Yeah.
about that. Don't use the academic word called perspective. This is not perspective. This is ideology.
Okay.
Please
all right.
continue.
Yeah, I stand corrected. So, certain ideologies.
Yes.
So, it seemed like they are coming from certain ideologies. And what was even more shocking was that when I went through the schedule of the WSC, the World Sanskrit Conference, I saw that on the second day, this particular session
Right.
on caste and gender studies was
Caste and gender in Sanskrit studies.
was
Right.
organized. It featured Mandakranta Bose,
Okay.
a professor emeriti of the University of British Columbia,
Okay.
Ananya Vajpayee, and
Okay.
Kaushal Panwar.
Okay.
So we even gave them the benefit of doubt.
Okay.
We thought it could be the analysis of the characters, the women characters,
Okay.
the powerful women characters
In Sanskrit literature,
Sanskrit
basically.
literature, such
Correct.
as Gandhari or Draupadi or Kunti, who come in
Shakuntala,
Shakuntala, in the
Urmila.
Mahabharata.
Yeah, yeah.
Such exemplary characters that we
Okay.
have got.
Okay.
We thought it could be that.
Now, I just want to make a note here. So, just to look at things in perspective, Ananya Vajpayee wrote a huge letter to all her colleagues about what she did, apparently. So, let me just read a couple of lines from what she said that she did in the panel discussion.
This is after the conference.
This is after the conference.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then, Arjun, I would like you to tell us what she actually did.
Okay.
So she says, I would like to state unequivocally that all three participants, Mandakranta Bose, Kaushal Pawar and I, spoke primarily about the texts we have worked on and the areas of our scholarly expertise, and not, except incidentally, in parenthesis, about our experiences as women or as members of any religion, caste, community or ethnicity. So Ananya Vajpayee, who brandishes her last name, which is typically a Brahmin surname, she's talking about these kind of topics, which is very ironic, but this is what she's claiming.
Well, I would absolutely disagree with that. I was present throughout the session, which started out about in the evening around 6 o'clock. It started, and these three were on the stage, and most of it that they were saying were their subjective experiences, which is not necessarily corroborated by any evidence. So how Kaushal Panwar was not allowed Sanskrit education, or how Mandakranta Bose faced some difficulty some 60 years back in West Bengal and such things. Some subjective experiences were being discussed. And to justify the kind of experiences or the causes of them, or the people who were affecting such experiences on them, they were quoting stuff out of context from the Dharma Shastras, from the Vedas, from several of the Suktas, and trying to show how the Indian culture or the Indian system is faulty. The Indian system is faulty because of such texts, and that is the reason why they have been subject to such injustice, is what they were trying to say. So these quoting of their so-called
this faulty this fraudulent lady Vajpayee, she says, we did not speak in an autobiographical vein, and our criticisms were not in the first instance about how we, personally and individually were treated in the course of our lives. That's exactly what they have discussed.
That is absolutely what they have discussed.
What Hari read out is the post facto letter that she has written.
So this is the kind of brazenness
Yeah,
that these,
this is lies. But what exactly happened is, is this post facto letter, is she telling the truth?
In the
To put
post
it
facto,
bluntly?
yeah, like you said, putting it bluntly, what she's saying there is not true at all.
Okay.
I don't know if the original video, the raw video of the recording, raw video or audio recording, if it will ever be made available online anywhere for public consumption.
Okay.
It is quite likely that the video or the audio that will be shared publicly will be highly edited. Because in the first place,
Because it would expose them.
it would expose them.
Go on.
So they spoke for about 1.5 hours.
Okay.
And there were several people, like say about 150 people in the audience. And the audience wanted to react to their discussion.
Okay.
We have not come here to wipe their tears off or to hear their sorrow stories or I don't know, to give them perfumed handkerchiefs or whatever.
Okay.
We came there for scholarly discussions, World Sanskrit Conference and Academic Forum.
Okay.
So, one of the professors there, Professor Srinivas Varkedi, who is now the Vice Chancellor of Kalidasa University, he made a very valid observation. So, if the forum or this particular 2-hour event was about discussing subjective personal experiences, which they largely did, then the forum will have to be balanced. So these three people had some similar experiences. There could be people who have had different variety of experiences. So you should have brought a broader spectrum, broader variety in the speakers there, first of all. Then, if it is subjective experience, then we should not be quoting texts.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Brilliant point.
Yeah.
Let me pause you there. And share the other side of this. So in this case, this I call this the personal sob story or the personal victim story. Years before, when you recall that Nirbhaya rape case, a lot of articles were written in mainstream, especially English media, blaming the Nirbhaya rape to our texts like Ramayana, Mahabharata, our Puranas. So they say that these texts sanction Hindu men to rape women. This was exactly written, I still remember, by a very famous author named...
That is shocking.
Yes, a columnist named Neelanjana Roy, who wrote this, for which I wrote a rebuttal in Business Standard. So this, except that I don't think Neelanjana...
But of course, these people will never talk about the great religion of peace, which actually sanctions rape of
Exactly. So how different is this? Except the fact that these mainstream English writers don't know Sanskrit, and but qualitatively, characteristically, I don't think there is any significant difference between what that narrative and this narrative.
Right. That's right.
You can
Excellent
point.
Arjun. So, in addition to this, what Dr. Varkedi said was that if it was a subjective discussion, let us have a variety of subjective experiences.
Right.
If it is an objective discussion, let us have scholars.
Absolutely.
Let us go through the text together. If there is anything problematic which we think is ethically wrong today, we have this internal corrective mechanism in the Sanatana Dharma.
Totally.
We have, in the history of the Sanatana Dharma, we have discarded texts and we have had new and new Dharma Shastras coming up, and never have we had a book like the Bible or the Quran, which is the absolute truth, which they claim to be the absolute truth
In
for
all
times,
disciplines, for all times.
for all times, for all places.
Yes.
There has been constant discussion. Any text in India that you see is in the form of dialogues, pros and cons, the Purva Paksha and Siddhanta. All that is constantly done. So we certainly can, the scholars in the Sanskrit conference can certainly go through the texts and say what is right and what is wrong and how to place them, what place we can give to them. And all this is possible also because we are operating within the framework of Sanatana Dharma.
Yeah, the moment you step out of those boundaries, there is no such thing as dialogue or objectivity.
Can these three, the three people, the three speakers, if they belonged to a different religion,
correct,
would they even have the voice to speak out these things in the public forum?
More importantly, what is the status of women in those two religions.
Absolutely. If you look at, the Ayan Hirsi Ali's work, Heretic and Infidel and all that, she talks about the abysmal state of women in Islam. And also we see, in fact, Sandeep, you and I have discussed about pedophilia and the Catholic Church. So
absolutely.
There are a lot of stories. So they are misusing and abusing the freedom that they are being given by the tradition. And also another thing is, if they are talking about their subjective experience, Dr. Shivani has spoken about her subjective experience, which is very different. Arjun, tell us something about that discussion.
In fact, I have quite a good personal connection with Dr. Shivani as well. I did my master's at the Karnataka Sanskrit University, and she was in charge of the master's program while I was doing it there. She also taught me for 4 semesters. She's a very nice human being, very true, very honest, very transparent. Like she herself said in the conference and elsewhere, she has told me in a personal conversation too, in a private conversation, that she belongs to one of the Dalit communities, the so-called Dalit communities. And she only later in her life, she took to Sanskrit studies. She clearly said, even in the conference, that throughout her studenthood, it is these so-called upper caste Brahmin men who have always treated her well, given her good guidance and taught her really well. This is true in the states of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, the 4 states in which she has had her education. In addition to it, she also said that once she took up the teaching profession, now she is an associate professor as far as I know in the Karnataka Sanskrit University, she has had hordes of students who belong to the Brahmin community.
Okay.
Neither the students nor the teachers have discriminated her just based on her birth. She has always gained respect for her knowledge, and people have guided her because she was really an inquisitive and really a genuinely, sincerely interested student.
A seeker, basically.
A seeker, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a fantastic point, Arjun.
Yeah.
But from whatever you've just said so far, and thanks for saying it in such detail, what I figure out that all these, so-called academics and objective scholars like Mandakranta Bose, Ananya Vajpayee, who's that son? Kaushal Panwar, all these guys, they have utterly politicized this because they all hail from a certain ideology, which is a far left ideology. Because why? I have a fundamental question for you, Arjun. 2 questions actually, both are related. Question 1, what in your reading actually forms the scope of Sanskrit studies?
So, very good question, Sandeep. To give quite an academic answer to it, today Sanskrit studies has some very specific and very specific relevance.
Okay.
So Sanskrit today should be seen as something like classical music.
Okay.
Which is enjoyable for composing poetry and for enjoying poetry which is already present in Sanskrit. There are several thousands of pages, lakhs of pages of Shastras written in the Sanskrit language. The nature of a Shastra itself is that it is translatable. Truths or facts in whatever language they are stated do not change.
Correct.
But a kavya is tied to the language and to the culture which it is a product of.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is that, for example, your Jayadeva's poetry cannot be translated without complete loss in form, basically.
Right.
Shabdalankara is lost.
Shabdalankara is totally lost.
Although so you can as the Arthalankara, because the Arthalankaras are product of the culture, the samskaras of the people of a particular land.
Correct.
So can you imagine the Harry Potter said in Kannada?
No, you can't.
That would sound really ridiculous, right?
Totally.
Similarly, reading Kalidasa in English or in French or in German,
or trying to read Kalidasa without knowing anything about Ramayana,
or about India,
In fact, I would like to add yet another personal experience here.
Okay.
I was learning the Greek language, classical Greek language, the Homeric Greek, in my times in Switzerland.
Okay.
I studied it for 3 semesters. I had a natural inclination to Greek mythology, the deities, the kind of creative culture that they had. because I belong to a similar culture, to the Sanatana Dharma. The Greek civilization, the Yavanas, were after all an offshoot of the people who migrated away from the Sindhu Saraswati basin.
Okay.
So I was able to relate to that culture, the Greek culture, very well. But my classmates, who were largely Swiss citizens or Germans, they found it ridiculous. So the mythology and the poetry of Greeks is being seen as something ridiculous because these people are not able to culturally connect to it. Similarly,
the roots were cut off.
Yeah, roots were cut off. So similarly, the essence, the importance of Sanskrit today would be largely in the field of aesthetics and studying the Kavya literature. But still, one can have intellectual curiosity in understanding the structure of language, the linguistics, the grammar, and how well Panini has codified the sutras.
Phonetics.
On one hand, or one could have a curiosity on the history of the development of the Dharma Shastras. That is a different kind of curiosity.
No,
that is an academic curiosity that a person can have. But the relevance of Sanskrit studies would today largely be limited to the kavyas and the aesthetics.
And from my another perspective, unless you preserve Sanskrit studies for whatever reasons, aesthetic reasons, you have to preserve it to, learn the authentic history of India. Without Sanskrit, that one crucial part of studying Indian history will be lost.
Absolutely, because most of our documentation in the ancient India were in the Sanskrit language. And that is what has been distorted either by innocence or willfully or with ulterior motive. It has been distorted.
No, in fact, it is a pity that we had to preserve it.
Yeah.
Fantastic point, Hari. Yeah, in our culture, we have to preserve it, taking conscious overt efforts instead of
being a natural
part of our life. Yeah. Absolutely. So the second related question, Arjun, for you. Now this we'll go back to the title of that public forum: caste and gender in Sanskrit studies. So how relevant are things like caste? Obviously, this title comes from a far left ideology. So related to it, how relevant are things like feminism, caste, Harijan, and obviously these are all British constructions, especially caste. How relevant are they to Sanskrit studies?
This is the first time that I ever encountered that even Sanskrit studies could be seen from the perspective of these ideologies. These kind of ideologies are not native to India at all. Until say 200 or 300 years back. Yeah. We have had several Sanskrit literary works, Shastras and Kavyas, two large categories.
The entire tradition, basically.
The entire tradition. We have internal corrections and criticisms and commentaries and all that. Never has a genre like feminism or the caste studies or the Harijan and
Dalit, all these things.
That has never been native to India at all. Indians were fine before that.
Exactly.
They were in peace.
Just one thing to just broaden the scope of this discussion, I'd like to mention here that Sanskrit was a lingua franca of India for thousands of years. It was spoken by everybody, from the king right down to the common man. As the language developed, for example, we see this very, I think the technical term is called dysglossia, but basically what happens is the spoken language and the written language become a little different. We see this very starkly in the case of Tamil.
Correct.
And to some extent in the case of Kannada and Telugu, where the language that is spoken is different from the language that is written. So similarly, the language that was written was Sanskrit, classical Sanskrit, and the language which was spoken became the various Prakrits.
Correct.
We also see this in the various plays like Machakatika, Mudra Rakshasa, where different people use different dialects, different Prakrits.
Bharata defines these Prakrits, and these are the Prakrits which have evolved into today's
Marathi, for example, evolved from a Maharashtra Prakrit.
Same with
Sauraseni and Saurashtric became Hindi. Odia Magadhi became Oriya.
So like this, we've had, so it was a lingua franca. Second thing, there's a big misconception that was perpetrated by colonial people and is still continued by all these leftists and pseudo scholars, is that the only thing that was restricted in some sense to people of the fourth Varna, which is Shudras, and women, was the Vedas. everything else was accessible to everybody, whether it's Mahabharata, Ramayana, Sanskrit as a language, Sanskrit grammar, Jyotisha. They could read any of the Kalpa Sutras, they could read any of the Puranas, all the philosophy, the wisdom, the poetry, the most enjoyable aspects of our tradition, everything was accessible to them. And the Vedas were kept to a smaller group, almost because it was something which was very important to preserve and take forward in an oral tradition. So they restricted the number of people who could learn the Veda. And even then we have so many exceptions, whether you take Kavasha Ayunusha or Satyakama Jabala, if they
Vishwamitra.
There are scores of examples
people
like
who are
this.
really interested to study Veda,
Yeah.
they demonstrated their genuine interest. They were allowed to do that.
Interest,
But-
ability and competence.
So, while the general rule was it is reserved for the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, over time naturally Kshatriyas and Vaishyas stopped reciting Vedas and it was primarily Brahmanas. And then later on, people of certain factions of Brahmanas, now all Brahmanas don't learn Veda today.
Absolutely.
So like this, it has changed and we must recognize that there was nothing like a social structure that was stopping people from doing things.
Correct.
It was just for earmarking, creating some broad classification for ease of functioning, for social security, job security and things like that. People who are competent, I mean, we hail the Mahabharata as the Panchama Veda. So many examples of people going from one Varna to the other because of their abilities.
Yeah, this give and take and this fluidity was there. Social fluidity was always present until the eve of Muslim invasions. That is what hardened all these things.
In fact, the undercurrent of the Vedas or the Dharma Shastras or the Kavyas, which is the Vedanta, is meant for everyone, irrespective of the caste, their gender, their nationality, or the time, their age, or whatever. So it's the Sat Chit Ananda that everyone is aiming at. And anybody who is a human being, who exists, has a right, can realize the Vedantic
Absolutely.
truths.
And this
So
is
it is
said,
not-
this is proclaimed in the Vedas itself.
In the Vedas itself, absolutely.
Not by some third party.
Correct.
Vedas themselves proclaim that you need not read the Veda to know the Veda.
Yeah, you realize it internally.
You can
Ultimately
realize
it is that.
And all the knowledge of the Veda, the wisdom is perpetrated through the Mahabharata, Ramayana, through the Kavyas, through the various Shastras. So it is always accessible. And there is a lot of contribution of all the different castes and communities into Sanskrit grammar, into Sanskrit literature. So these things they conveniently forget and they pick a few isolated instances of Shambhuka and Ekalavya, but we also have Vidura. We also have Karna. There are so many cases where this kind of give and take has happened and nobody seemed to have a problem with that, except until these people came on the scene.
Until these people
With
came.
a view to-
The other thing, thanks for mentioning that. Before we close, I was just reading Ananya Vajpayee's so-called reply to all this controversy.
It's a rant.
It is a total rant, and the language she uses is appalling. She appeals to authority, and this kind of it's pretty arrogant, and it's rather funny that she who is arrogant accuses others of being arrogant, frog in the well mentality, what is this, baseless notions of their own superiority, and appeal to authority. Oh, he is a doctor, he is a professor, appeal to authority. This is logical fallacy, by the way.
First of all, she should give up her surname if she really wants to
Exactly,
discuss with Brahmins.
exactly, and become a Dalit. Let her proclaim that she is a Dalit. Then we will see how many people will roll out the red carpet.
And not only that, another
These
thing
people
from-
are useful. These people are useful. Hari, sorry, I'm a little young. So these people are useful as long as they are Brahmins.
No, and also the funny thing, I know from personal experience speaking with some people like this, they have a notion of Brahmin superiority in their drawing room.
Exactly, yeah.
While they drink their Scotch whiskey and smoke their 555 cigarette, they have a Brahmin superiority.
Absolutely, yeah, I've seen such people. Yeah.
So, and then another thing, before we close, I want to mention one more thing of what she says. She writes in this rant, it's ridiculous to suggest that we hate Sanskrit, India, Hindu culture and so on. Nobody spends their life poring over, learning and teaching something that they hate. Studying the enemy is a very important part of military tactics.
Boss, Max Muller precisely did this and declares it as such. For 50 years he did this, and he declares that I have dedicated my life to studying these Vedas only to prove and cut off the roots of this false religion.
So this is exactly what Wendy Doniger says in her translation of Rig Veda. I love Rig Veda. If you really love it, then it should be seen in demonstration, not in words.
Hari, I love you. I'll push you off from this balcony. It is for your own good.
Exactly.
All right. Let us quickly come back to that panel discussion. You both made very good points, very interesting points. To come back to that panel discussion and quickly conclude with the World Sanskrit Conference, there were a few other interesting points said by the people in the audience.
Okay.
Chammu Krishna Shastri, for instance, said, he quoted the example of a Gurukula, which is in the outskirts of Bangalore in Chennai, where they don't see the gender or which varna or which jati,
social strata,
which social strata that person belongs to, he or she belongs to, and he's given all the facilities, all the education that they can provide. So Chammu Krishna Shastri quoted this example, and all through these people were given 1.5 hours. The three panelists were given 1.5 hours to give their opinions, and the audience was not even given a chance to give their rebuttals. We had to fight to get the mic and speak, and everything that the audience spoke. The rebuttals were put on off record. And I don't know, it was the convener himself, Adish Satye, who was managing that show, and he made sure that everything that the audience is saying is put off record, and only what the panelists are saying is on record. So this is absolute great hypocrisy and
yeah, so I have a take on this because I have my own similar experiences, and having been to several of such places, these conferences, in the sense that a leftist conference will never invite you.
Correct.
So what they want to do is they want to abuse you. They are not willing to debate.
Right.
So their notion of an intellectual or a public discourse is not a discourse. It's not one way.
Right.
They want to tell you
it's propaganda.
It is propaganda.
Right.
They want to abuse and they want to glorify by way of solutions. It's some revolution or whatever concoctions they have. But we are all familiar with it.
Right.
Why this has happened here and why this has provoked such outrage is because, and it is a very dangerous precedent.
Right.
Is because it's the first time it is happening in something like Sanskrit studies.
And where is it happening? It's happening in a university, a big university, the University of British Columbia, where there could be several innocent people in the audience with no background, just out of curiosity. They could have come there to witness the Sanskrit conference, and this is what they take home, so that they never approach Sanskrit studies ever again. So that is the impression they are trying to build, the three panelists like this.
And you see, the whole ecosystem is built in such a way that you are expected to be writing in complicated English. You are expected to, talk about it with a condescending air. They don't give the original when they translate. It's you can see the standard tactics used by all these people, and even if they give the original, it will be transliterated in English with using their own crazy diacritic words. This is the kind of thing they do.
We have seen that. We have seen Murthy Classical Library,
Clay Sanskrit Library, especially. So like this, they have their own bag of tricks. And the reason why it has become such a big controversy also, Sandeep, is because finally, I think, people have stood up and said this is wrong. People have stood up and they are
not taking it lying
down. And again, I see a kind of a positive thing in some of these episodes, the Christianization of Carnatic music episode and the World Sanskrit Conference, and how the rebuttals were sent on various forums, that finally Hindus are standing up and saying, no, we won't take this bullshit anymore.
Absolutely, yes.
And it is time that we bring the truth to the world, and we won't be living under this falsehood. And
no, at a fundamental level, sorry to interrupt because I'm forgetful. So, where this has to lead to is not only a renaissance, but a proper, well thought out movement, for lack of a better word, movement to reclaim our own heritage and keep it in our own hands.
and offer the best of our culture
Absolutely.
to the people. Let them decide. We are, unlike these leftists, we are not having any propaganda. We want to share the truth, and whoever is interested can take it.
Yes.
And we welcome everybody to come and take it and leave it to their devices. And this is exactly what Krishna tells Arjuna on the battlefield. Finally, after telling all the Bhagavad Gita,
you
he
do
says,
what your mind tells you.
whatever you feel like.
Tata Kuru. Right. I think on that philosophical note, we can close this episode of the Great Indian Political Weekly. We do this every week, and if you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments box, and don't forget to like our videos, share them with your family and friends, and subscribe to our channel. This is Sandeep Balakrishna signing off.
Arjun Bharadwaj.
Hari Ravi Kumar.